Ladies and gentlemen, in the interest of time, we're going to go. It's 2 minutes after 9 o'clock. We're going to start this committee hearing. Ladies and gentlemen, if you'll please take your seats, we'll get started. If somebody doesn't mind pulling that door closed by there. It's 2 minutes after 9. We'll get started. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you and welcome to the Subcommittee on Higher Ed Appropriations of the Appropriations Committee for the 2013 budget. The schedule today will be Mr. Tim Cannell with Georgia Student Finance will be up first. He has a previously scheduled appointment, and I wanted to try to accommodate him as well. And then we'll move to the Regents, and then we will do the Technical College System of Georgia. What you have in your folders, members of the committee, are the basic tracking sheet. You have the summaries, which I ask each individual agency to provide for you. And with respect to the Regents, you also have a list of their suggested smaller cap projects and their pipeline, effectively, that was suggested to the governor's office. So with that, I'm going to call on Tim Cannell. If you'll come up and tell us about your budget request.
Good morning. Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for allowing me to go first this morning. Good morning to members of the subcommittee. I understand that you can find the Georgia Student Finance Commission information beginning on page 107 of your tracking documents. I understand we don't want to go through a line-by-line review this morning, but hit sort of the high points, and I'm happy to do so. First of all, the Georgia Student... Sorry, we're on a different page now. You're on Sorry. It's all right. Okay, page 9 of the document you have. Like all state agencies, the Georgia Student Finance Commission was, as part of the budget instructions, to identify 2% budget cuts to state general fund programs, and we of course did so. The Office of Planning and Budget chose to take those cuts, and that's in the tuition equalization grant program, about $2.5 million. As you know, this is the program that provides grant assistance to Georgia students attending private schools, very old program going back to the early 1970s. The amount of the cut will still enable us to provide the same level of assistance to roughly 32,000 students at $700 per year that we're able to do this year. So in effect, the consequence of the cuts is not to reduce either the number of students or the level of assistance that they currently receive. We'll be able to maintain that same level of benefit for next fiscal year. Another item I'd like to point out, there is an increase in the administrative amount of funds that we receive of $152,000. That increase is similar to the same kinds of increases that other agencies have received for increasing premiums associated with employees' retirement, unemployment compensation, health insurance, and the like. So that's what that item is related to. I'd also like to mention that the sum of our requests related to the HOPE programs versus the governor's recommendation, there's in total about a $30 million difference. I'd like to point out that when the Office of Planning and Budget and the governor's office was preparing its recommendations, they had later information than we had, and so we are quite comfortable with the level of recommendation in the governor's budget. If in fact our numbers were a little closer to the mark, then we'll come back to you in the amended budget next year, but I think as I said, we're very comfortable. That's only about a 5% differential between what we had requested and what they had recommended. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll be happy to try to answer any questions that any members of the subcommittee may have.
Any questions of members of the committee? Representative, did you have wait, I've got a question here. Representative Wright.
Thanks, Tim, for coming today.
Thank you.
Good to see you again.
Thank you.
As always, thank you for the job you do with staff and all that less money you've got. On 45-15-1, the Zell Miller Scholars, I just noticed the $19 million
Yes.
Down in that. That's not new news. I just wanted to understand how you come to that amount. Or is that just a straight 2%, or is it?
No, actually, for the Zell Miller Scholars, that money represented, in effect, the incremental cost of the Zell Miller Scholarship above the Hope benefit for those students. And since schools invoice us for a student, regardless of whether they're a Zell Miller Scholar or a regular Hope Scholar, we found it easier from an accounting and paying standpoint if we consolidated the dollars associated with the Zell Miller Scholarship into the regular public and private scholarship. So the dollars are there for the Zell Miller Scholars. It's just that it was to simplify the way that the invoices come in and the way they're paid.
Ambry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Excel program, which I guess the General Assembly just, I started that, I believe, last year.
Well, last year was the first year it switched from lottery funds to state general funds, so it's now a state general funded program.
Is there can you give me the, just a brief overview of the requirements in order to qualify for that program? And then I have a couple other quick questions afterwards.
Of course, you have to be a high school student. You have to be recommended by a counselor or a teacher. There's not a GPA requirement associated with Excel. It's basically in the judgment of the student, the counselor, the teacher, the parents, that the student is ready to take on college level work. And the requirement is the student get both the credit towards high school graduation for the coursework taken at the collegiate level, and of course they'll get college credit as well. The program pays tuition, fees, and books.
Is there a SAT or ACT requirement?
No, there is not.
And then also, I just want to point out, I know that your department has been scrutinized just a little bit, but I wanted you to share with the members of the committee. You've got field representatives around the state going into high schools and talking about the different programs, which I wanted you to just briefly tell about that. There's hundreds. If you just take the number of high schools, it's almost mind-boggling to try to figure out how you do that and accomplish that with the small staff that you have. I think that's important that the members should know that. And then also, one of the greatest resources is GA College 411. I went onto the website this weekend, and I don't know if any of the members have, but that is just a great resource. So maybe just share a little bit about that. And then finally, calculating all this information for all of these students. I mean, that in itself is just an enormous task. So just share some of those. Your office is doing a great job.
Well, thank you very much for the comment.
Those just three areas right there in itself should be enough. But
well, I appreciate the question. Happy to answer. First of all, with respect to our field staff, we do have staff who live throughout the state, 8 or 9 of them. And their job is solely to visit high schools and middle schools or be available for probe fairs or college fairs whenever they're asked to go to. But their primary job is to visit high schools and middle schools to present to parents and students, work with counselors and teachers about the opportunities that students have to pursue their education beyond high school. We take that very earnestly. Our staff visit many schools multiple times during the year. Last year, we visited almost 1,500 high school, middle schools. The year before that, 1,800. We're on track to do similar numbers this year. That's just the visits to the high schools and middle schools. Collectively, we probably make presentations to 250,000 teachers and students every year through that program. And we think it's a vital outreach effort to promote the idea of post-secondary education in our state. With respect to GA College 411, it's probably maybe the most successful mentor site in the United States. It's one that we've had since February of 2005. Last year we had over 900,000 individual Georgians created a personal account at the site. It processed well over 200,000 college applications through the site. Basically, the site's intended to provide information to students and parents about how to apply and pay for in picking a college, which is a critical element of picking the appropriate post-secondary institution for each individual. So it's been highly successful, and we think that the field staff that we have really supplement the information provided for GA College, because frankly there's ultimately no substitute from having the opportunity for a parent or a student to sit across from one of our counselors to ask them questions. For many people, as you know, applying to college can be kind of an intimidating thing, particularly if there's no one in the family that's ever preceded that individual into college. So we're very proud of what our field staff are able to accomplish. And again, thank you for your question. And our single biggest expense, by the way, of the funds that we do get is for the website that we have, the GA College. That's probably about a quarter of the total amount of the admin fee we get pays for that.
And then the calculations, you guys do the calculations?
Yes. Each spring, we do all the calculations for all of the graduating high school seniors, roughly $100,000 a year. That determines their initial HOPE eligibility from a GPA, grade point average standpoint. And then during the course of the year, for a variety of reasons, we have to do a lot of hand calculations for students if for one reason or another their information wasn't complete, not submitted by the school or whatever, we do that as well for students.
No. Okay, Representative Nix.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Would you touch on the tuition equalization grants again and make sure I understood that correctly? There's really no impact to the student. It's a shifting of funds. Is that what I'm hearing?
The amount of the cut that we took will enable us to continue the same level of financial benefit for students next year as we have this year, and it will not reduce, by the virtue of the cut, the number of students who can receive the benefit. We think that the dollars that are in the governor's recommendation are adequate to provide the same level of assistance at $700 per year that we're able to do this year.
Okay, and that doesn't make any change other than for this year. It doesn't change the program.
Correct, does not.
Thank you.
Okay, another one cropped up there. Representative Rogers, Chairman Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Cannell, tell me how many people are working for the Georgia Student Finance Commission. Just looking at the governor's budget book, under the Georgia Higher Education Assistant Corporation, how many people work there? Georgia Student Finance Authority, and then you have the Non-Public Post-Secondary Education Commission. Can you give us a breakdown?
Sure.
I'm learning, so.
Sure. First of all, the Non-Public Post-Secondary Education Commission is an attached agency of ours, so they're not really our employees. We have in sum between the corporation, the authority, and the commission about 135 employees, which I'll note is down about 65 since I came to work there in 2005. We have about 51 FTEs currently associated with the commission. When I say FTEs, that doesn't translate into a position count necessarily, but it does reflect the fact that, for example, I'm an employee of all three organizations, so a portion of my time is apportioned up between the three. So we've got 51 associated basically with the commission and its programs and activities, and then the remaining balance of the employees are roughly split between the authority and the corporation.
Okay. Further follow-up, Mr. Chairman. You're showing on the Georgia Student Finance Commission restore funds for one position. So that's on page 10 of our document. Can you tell us what that position is and what they'll be doing, please?
That's impact, isn't it? Yeah, that's Non-Public Post-Secondary Education Commission. That's not our position. Again, they're an attached agency of ours.
Okay.
It's not our position.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Okay.
Got a couple questions for you. I've gotten some information, and I'm sorry I haven't given it to you this earlier, but I've just gotten information. I'd like to start a dialogue about this because I'm just finding out about this. I'm going to ask you to work with the Vice Chairman, Mr. Chokas. I understand that there's two other needs-based 1% loan programs. Are you familiar with the Graduate on Time and the Public Service Program?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Can you explain just a little bit about these? And what I'm trying to understand is there funding that's there? I know we have a checkoff program for that, if I understand correctly.
That's correct also.
And if there's funds in there, and at what level do the funds have to reach before you can actually begin to give scholarships? And I'm particularly interested in Graduate on Time. That's got to be an overall savings. If you're not paying for Hope Dollars out for year 5 or 5.5, then so can you give me a little bit of background
Sure,
there,
I'd
and
be
maybe we
happy
can
to.
work towards some.
All three programs, which we refer to as the 1% loan program, as well as the Graduate on Time and the Public Service Program, were all created as a result of legislation that was enacted in the 2009 session. Whether the legislation was initially set up was that the programs would not be activated. Any of the three loan programs would not to be activated until the individual accounts of each of the three programs had reached at least a $500,000 threshold. Last year was the first year. Now there also, as the chairman refers to, a provision in the law that allows on the tax return form, Georgians to check off a voluntary contribution to any of the three accounts. And we have received, I guess, about $60,000 or so over the 3 years that the program it was in statute. Last year was the first year that we received sufficient funding in any one of the program accounts to activate the program. That was the $20 million that were appropriated to us for the 1% loan program. The 1% loan program, just to remind you, is intended to assist students. It's in effect a loan of last resort. Students who apply have to exhaust all other state and federal financial aid resources before they are eligible to receive any money under the 1% loan program. It's a 10-year term. As I said, this is the first year that we received the funds for that. We have had 2 application cycles. We expect to complete reviewing all the last of the applications by the end of this month. We have awarded thus far this year about $17 million to students at 95 different institutions with a loan amount of around $7,000 or so.
Okay, so we've got another recommendation for $20 million.
Yes, sir.
So neither of the other 2 programs, if I understand you, have met the base amount before you can
Correct.
begin?
That is correct. And certainly, as you noted, if the 1% loan program or for the graduate on time, it obviously is intended to create an incentive for students to complete in 4 years their college degrees. You know, now the average is around 6, and so if we can get students out more quickly, it frees up space. Perhaps we don't need quite as much capacity. So that's the intent of the program, to create a financial incentive for students to finish in 4 years.
What I'd like to do, Mr. Cannell, maybe for the next hearing, if you'll work with Vice Chairman Chokas on this, maybe we can understand a little bit more about those and maybe make some recommendations.
Happy to.
That especially that graduate on time. I'd love to see some cost-benefit analysis, if you've got any analysis at all, about what, like you said, an average of 6, if you even took 10% of those off, how much would that actually save you with respect to the overall program? If maybe you put another $5 million in maybe the graduate on time, how much would it save? If you can do any analysis like that or something.
Okay, we'd be happy to. Thank you.
Any further questions for Mr. Gunn? Oh, okay, the Vice Chairman Chokas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Quick question. You said you've allocated or set aside $17 million to the tune of about $7,000 each for the students?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And are you going to max out at $20 million?
Yes, we will use all the funds available to us. Yes, sir.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Chairman Rogers had another question.
Mr. Cannell, question. I had a situation within a year dealing with military families. Give you examples. My son, been deployed several times overseas. Many Georgia, born and raised, went to school here, been gone for some time, changed their legal residence to another state, come back. Families could be living here. Their children graduate from a Georgia high school. I've run into a situation where they would not qualify for HOPE because that male parent or female parent has been deployed and also has forgotten they're not a Georgia resident. Have y'all got rules and regs in place to address this, or do we need to address this by statute?
Of course, as you noted, if they're a Georgia resident, that qualifies them. If they're stationed, if the military personnel is stationed in Georgia, they also qualify. And Tracy, further on that, on the military families, is there also, under the example that he cited, do they qualify or not? If the family's not a resident and the individual military person is not stationed in Georgia, can they still qualify?
Likely not, but it's not one item that determines residency. The change in home state of residency would have an impact.
Okay.
Can you repeat that?
Yes, the official residency status of the military family will do a lot to dictate. So under your example, they would not be likely not eligible, although there are a multiplicity of things that can indicate residency. But if they are not deemed a resident of Georgia, nor is a military person stationed in Georgia, they most likely would not be eligible.
So further, Mr. Chairman, if I may, so a family could be here, a mother, wife could be here, she could be a resident, they could graduate from the high school 3 or 4 years, and because the spouse is deployed and he's not a legal resident of Georgia, they do not qualify for the HOPE scholarship, the children.
If the wife is a resident, a legal resident of Georgia, then the children would qualify.
The wife.
Even if the spouse, or if it's of course if it's the other way around, but
Okay.
if the spouse is deployed outside of the state of Georgia, but the other spouse is living here and is a legal resident of Georgia, the children would qualify.
Okay, even though the spouse or the wife is not working and paying state income tax,
Correct.
they still qualify.
Yes, it's not based upon payment of taxes, it's based upon residency.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Rice.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One more question. It just struck my mind on the 1% loan program. Nationally, student loans of this type have been notorious for not being paid back. Is there any provision in these loans that assure us any better hope of them being paid back over that 10-year period?
Well, we certainly hope so. I mean, we are going to experience defaults as we do on any loan program. As you quite point out, there are defaults in the federal loan program. We can anticipate defaults on these. There is a promissory note. We will try to pursue that through a collection agency as we do for federal loans that we try to collect, but inevitably there will be some losses, some uncollectible loans.
Any more questions for Mr. Cannell? I don't see any. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much. Thank you, members of the committee as well.
Okay. Thank you, members of the committee. I'm going to have Representative Chokas take a look at those other 1% programs. I think it might be instructive to see if there are some cost savings, especially that graduate on time. I wasn't aware of them until I got an email last week, so let's take a look at some of those. And I think probably with respect to Chairman Rogers' questions, those would probably be better. I think you can deal with those in your committee as far as the actual rules and regulations. That's not. I wasn't aware of that either. Okay, next is the Board of Regents with our former colleague, Chancellor Huckabee. We're always glad to have you back. I don't know about your compatriot there. We'll talk to him in a moment. I believe John Brown is going to take some time to also edify us on certain parts of the budget. So, Chancellor Huckabee, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a pleasure to be here in a different capacity than I was last year. But I just wanted to say a few introductory comments. I will not repeat in any way all that I said before the full committee several weeks ago. I would just say as a prelude to John coming forward and presenting all the numbers, that we're very excited about the budget that the governor has proposed to you all for consideration this year. As you know, the last 3 or 4 years have been a real challenge financially for all of us. The university system budget's been cut by over $1 billion in the last 3 to 4 years. And the recommendation of the governor this year is beginning to hopefully build back to a level of funding that will reflect the enrollment growth of the university system. So that money that's is in his proposed budget is very, very important to us. We're very excited also about the capital budget that he's proposed. As I said earlier, several weeks ago, that we have a backlog of projects on the capital list of around $400 to $500 million projects that have been planned and designed and waiting for construction. So the recommendation of the governor makes a big dent in that, and we are appreciative of that. I will say this, that I've finished 7 months as chancellor. I'm in about 7.5 months now through the process. Very excited about what we're doing. We've brought in some excellent staff, a lot of great things I think going on, and we'll see those pay great dividends in the future. We're committed to doing everything we possibly can to assure to you and the general public that we're using our resources wisely. We're stepping back and looking at a lot of our processes and procedures. And it's certainly the message that we are beating the drum every day with our presidents, that we are in a new day in terms of public financial support, and it's incumbent upon us to make every dollar count. So that's our philosophy. We'll keep doing that, not on the staff level, but our board is very much committed to that as well. So we look forward to your questions. If it's okay with you, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield the floor to John Brown.
Okay,
And,
we'll I guess we don't need to make him wait any longer. Right. And then we can ask you some questions. If
Sure.
it's all right with the committee, we can ask the chancellor some questions after Mr. John Brown goes through his summary, but I just want to say
Yeah.
how much I appreciate working with a former colleague, and what a new day it really is. And
Well, thank you very much. The feeling's mutual. We'll be around to answer your questions.
Okay. Next up is Mr. John Brown, who needs very little introduction to this committee. We worked with him for many years until he decided to desert, I think would be an appropriate term. I notice, members of the committee, in your package, you'll have a lot of the summaries, and as usual, they're very clear and very good that Mr. Brown provides. But I want to point out something. When we used to get ours, he was very cheap for good reason. Ours were in black and white. I understand that as soon as he gets to Regents, the chairman of this committee doesn't even have a color printer. He didn't. And you have a large color that has a fuchsia color to it. I understand, and we didn't get those when you worked here.
That's right.
And now you're spending this money. I want to set a tone for.
I retired those. I did.
Okay, just Mr. Brown, you can continue your presentation.
Thank you, and you feel free to jab me anytime.
Don't worry.
You have a tracking sheet, but if I could get you to look inside the folder that was passed out, I think I can give you a better flavor of what's in the university system budget than maybe going line by line through the track sheet. The very first page that you see inside the folder is a graph. As you know, the teaching program, the formula for the university system is enrollment driven, and this is a 10-year history of where we've been on enrollment. To give you some frame of reference, you may recall from about 2002 to 2005, that's when we first hit the skids on the economy for a little period of time. You see quite a bit of enrollment growth from, say, 217 to 247 to 250. A lot of that's attributable to people going back to school. You may recall that we only had about 2 years where the budget wasn't quite as difficult and enrollment kind of settled down a little bit in the middle of the graph. And then we've had the most recent downturn of the last 4 to 5 years. And apparently a lot of folks, as is usually the case, have gone back to school. Last year, this committee was looking at the growth, if you follow the chart, from FY09 to FY10, 282,000 students to 301,000, so a jump of almost 20,000 students. And you may remember a number that was floating around that was $145 million worth of enrollment growth. And that we didn't have the money, that wasn't funded, still not funded, and we're not seeking to get it funded. But that was the number last year. This year, when I go over the summary, you're going to see $72 million worth of enrollment growth, and that is the growth associated with going from 301 to 311, about 10,000 students over the last year. What I want to point out is that 1 year from now, depending on how much the formula changes, and we're looking at going to a performance-based funding formula, that 1 year from now, if we're still functioning as we are now with an enrollment-driven formula, our change will be from 311 to 318. So this year we're looking at a 3% increase. Next year it's going to be more in the 2% range. And if I had to give you just a rough guess today, next year's enrollment growth would probably be more in the 40 to 45 million range. So I know you have seen some large growth numbers from us. It is kind of settling down. We're very appreciative for the formula money that's here, and as you look ahead, hopefully that's going to get a little more manageable. If I can get you to turn now to the page that is page 1. This page represents all of the cash, no bonds, all the cash money that's been recommended by the governor. And I tried to summarize it in the easiest fashion possible. For fiscal 12, we start with a base budget of $1.7 billion. The first section that you see are budget reductions. You may know that the governor in his budget instructions asked a number of agencies to include the university system to present a 2% cut plan. He took our 2% cut plan and actually added just a little bit more. Our final reduction across the board was 2.27%, and that's $37 million. Of the $37 million, 35 of it is in the teaching program, which is synonymous with the formula. The other $2 million is spread across some of the activities that many of you have probably come to call the B unit activities. I would like to tell you that the governor did give some relief on budget reductions to several activities, to include Ag Experiment Station, the Cooperative Extension Service, Vet Med Experiment Station, GTRI that gets a significant match, the Marine Institute, Marine Extension, and Forestry Research. Now, most of them still took some kind of reduction, but they got a little bit of a break. And what I would like to tell you, I think the Chancellor and I both know that these are activities that through the years have not got a lot of attention. Some of it's because the budget instructions won't allow us. We're often allowed to ask for the formula enrollment growth to serve new students, and that's usually it this last few years. So there's not been a lot of opportunities to ask for anything on those activities, but going forward, if allowed to do so, we want to demonstrate that we're going to pay some more attention to all the activities under the university system to include those. Other than the 2% reductions, the governor identified several transfers. As you look through the track document, the transfers net out to $742,000, and by and large, the $742,000 that you see there is a transfer of the HERDI advanced materials from the Department of Economic Development to the university system budget. They would like to forge a relationship with Georgia Southern. So that accounts for most of the 742, but you see a few things that net to zero that are being transferred from the formula to special funding initiatives, or special funding initiatives to the formula. So we're still trying to understand some of that ourselves. There are 3 programs in the budget that are targeted for elimination, and these fall under the special funding initiatives. The first one's the Georgia Leadership Institute. Many of you know that as GLISI. It provides some leadership training to school officials, principals, school leaders. This program has got a match through the years. As far as the future, whether it can continue on some private funds and continue that way, we'll have to see and try to work with them. The ICAP Health Program, which was already doing some nursing related work, there's an elimination of the program as it's currently written at $585,000, but it's really being redirected into the other nursing initiative that we'll talk about in just a minute, and that's the initiative to try to make sure we have more faculty in order to teach nursing. That seems to be one of the big bottlenecks toward turning out more nurses, is that we just flat do not have enough to teach them. And then the last item is called Accountability Plus. This is an activity where we maintain a data warehouse of information. That's going to be important to us going forward as we look at performance-based funding, because we'll need data and metrics. But this $300,000 is something that we'll somehow manage to absorb and continue on. So under the budget reductions, the net total reductions, $38 million. Then we get to the formula funding, and all of these transactions would be found under the teaching program and the tracking document as you go back and look and have time. As I mentioned, our enrollment growth from fall of 2010 to fall of 2009 till fall of 2010 was $72 million worth. It's a 3% enrollment growth. This money, of course, very important. We're appreciative for the recommendation. This is what will allow us to try to maintain affordability and get through the coming year. The second item, we have buildings coming online. These are previously GO bond funded projects There's 650,000 square feet of space coming online. This is the utilities and the various operating costs for those buildings, $3.7 million. The next item is health insurance at 5.2%. I'd like to take a moment to actually brag a little bit about this one. The system's worked hard to control its cost, and I'm very careful the way I phrase this. It's not cost savings, it's that we have taken steps to avoid costs. It's not like we have saved and there's a pot of money, but we have been ahead of state health benefit plan and going to 70-30 split instead of a 75-25. We took the step of identifying part-time employees as being 30 hours a week instead of 20, so that benefits were a little more limited. We've looked at HMO enrollment, trying to incent individuals there and avoid some costs. If not for those steps, this 5.2% probably would have been more of a 15% health increase given medical inflation and what's going on around us. But the $10.9 million is very important to us as well. It helps continue to pay for our personnel. The next couple of items, TRS, ERS adjustments, these were items that we did not ask for, but you will see throughout pretty much all agency budgets. This is the money that is spread throughout government. It's approximately a 1% increase in the retirement contribution by employers for TRS. Keeps the plan actuarially sound. Item 5 are the various insurance programs administered by DOAS, liability, workers' comp, and unemployment. This too was money that was added by OPB and the governor and spread throughout a number of agencies in the budget to make sure that the DOAS insurance programs are sound. Item 6 was a request. This is the Retiree Health and Life Program. Many of you will refer to it as OPEB, other post-employment benefits. We currently need to pay as we go so that our retirees are getting the benefits that have been promised. The long-term goal, I believe, by the governor and others is to try to figure out some way to bring our OPEB liability down. But for now, this is the money that's needed to stay on a pay-as-you-go basis. And then item 7 has a little history. I'll try to make it quick, but back in the day before we had the JAHIFA program, we really did not do revenue bonds for revenue-producing facilities. We took a stab for a number of years at issuing GO bonds to build parking decks, to build bookstores, anything that generated revenue, and it was the GO debt, but we would use the revenue from those facilities to help retire the debt. Little did I know, 20 years ago, a couple of us put these projects into the budget at Georgia and Georgia Tech, and now they're retired. And the original agreement was that once it was retired, the money that had been deducted from the budget would be restored. So that's $830,000. These facilities are there still. They're still earning revenues, but this is adhering to the spirit of the original agreement. Under other items, and I really do not want to do an injustice to them by rolling them up, but you probably know that the university system, by looking at the track sheet, is really a series of about 18 or 19 budgets. The largest one by far is the teaching program at total funds of well over $5 billion. It overshadows, it seems, all the others. As I said earlier, we need to look at, and we will do better looking at the ag and the co-op and the marine programs going forward. But for ease of giving you an idea what's going on here, I have rolled up all of the activities that are budget unit B. If you read the track sheet, you will see over and over that each of the B budgets is receiving some amount of health insurance and life insurance adjustment that corresponds to the same 5.2% that's in the teaching program. Each of the activities are getting some kind of a TRS, ERS addition that corresponds to the addition that was made in the formula. A couple of other unique items, the Georgia Public Libraries. There's a $394,000 add to the libraries. They are based on a population-driven formula, a certain amount of money per person to drive library materials and operating costs. The 394 funds this year's formula for the libraries. There is a small reduction to SREB. In just a moment, I have a backup sheet for you. The $4,000, all of the slots are funded. And I know, Mr. Chairman, you're always interested in the slots. There is one item that I'll put on the table that we built the facility for SREB on 10th Street 20 years ago. Also kind of on the payback basis. The agreement was that 20 years ago that in exchange for building that facility on 10th Street that we would get a break on our dues, that we would get approximately $90,000 discount. The building's now paid. SREB would like for us to continue paying our dues. We do not think that we will drop out of the SREB. So that expense is out there. It's not a pure dues increase. It's a dues deferral that has occurred over time. And if there's one small item I could ask you to consider, it would probably be just to make sure that we're whole on what we need to do to be in the SREB.
What's that?
Hmm?
What's that?
90,000. And then the other activities, in just a moment, I'm going to ask President Aziz to speak to these more in depth, but as you know from the governor's budget speech, $5 million has been added for Georgia Health Sciences to create another cancer research center. He can tell you more of the details on that, and we'll call on him in just a moment. There are two other health-related initiatives. One of them is graduate medical education. The notion is that this state's training a number of doctors now between Mercer expansion, Savannah, the UGA medical, Georgia Health Science initiative to turn out more doctors. But we can train a lot of doctors, but if we do not keep them in state, we're training them for somebody else. And the general guideline has always been that residents will settle about 50 miles from where they do their residency. So it's important to start some new programs in hospitals around the state in order to keep our graduates and perhaps even import some graduates that have trained in other medical schools. So this $1.2 million is the first year of trying to work with hospitals to start some new residency programs. The question has come up, and I'll go ahead and tackle it now. Why is this money in our budget as opposed to the health budget or with the Georgia Board of Physician workforce? My best answer there is that we see it, especially in startup mode, as education related. We've got to find places for those that are coming out of our medical schools, all medical schools, and it's not just Georgia Health Sciences, but all medical schools. We've got to find a place for them in order to keep them in state. I think that we're a slightly larger entity. We've got a little more horsepower and manpower that we can throw at this to work with hospitals, cultivate some relationships than the Georgia Board. The Georgia Board, I think, is an organization of 4 to 5 people. I used to work there, fine people, but I'm not sure they have enough to really pursue all the relationships and starting of new programs. Now, I will say this, if successful and we identify and we develop new programs and we get from startup funding with state funds, and eventually the goal is that within a few years Medicare funds come along and then pay for the operation of the program. Once we get into a long-term maintenance mode where it's more of just a flow of the money, then I do believe that the money belongs for the long term with the Georgia Board. But in this initial startup phase and being strategic about where we can start and develop new relationships with hospitals and roll the money out, I feel like it belongs here. And that's not to say we are working closely with the Georgia Board and others as partners on this effort. The last two items on this, well, one item, nursing faculty initiatives. You heard me say earlier, the governor has added some money. He's actually added about $2.5 million, and then the $585 that was eliminated from ICAP Health Above, for a grand total of $3 million. This is money that allows us to train more nursing faculty. Our big problem is that part of the bottleneck is that we just do not have enough to teach nurses. Those that become nurses frequently go out and practice as nurses so they can make more money that way. This is a multi-level approach. Some of it's salary related. Some is to encourage them to get master's and doctorate degrees so that they'll stay in the nurse teaching field. Making sure that they're exposed to the latest in terms of clinicals. So this is an effort to beef up the faculty. And I'll let Dr. Aziz address some more of that. The last two items are truly our attached agencies. Can't say too much, but Georgia Military College and Georgia Public Telecommunications are pass-through items for us. I believe with the military college, this is their adjustment for some enrollment in their grade 6-12 program. And then for Georgia Telecommunications, I believe they're largely just a net cut.
Let me interrupt you just for a minute, members of the committee. What I'm going to ask when we have our next meeting, which we will be probably next week, I'm going to ask some of the attached agencies to come in and talk a little bit, including the libraries, Georgia Public Television, and possibly even Georgia Military College, or any others that the members of the committee would like to have any conversation with. If you'll let me know, I can invite them from some questions if that. And obviously the regents would be involved in that as well, but just in case there develops questions on these individuals.
For all of this, and this is a summary, it reconciles to the grand total between reductions and the additions largely for formula. The net change to the university system budget is $86.7 million. Of course, we haven't seen a positive number the last few years, so we're grateful for that. It would bring our budget to $1.8 billion on the cash side. I think maybe I should probably pause for a few cash questions here.
Let's do that.
And again, I'll have Dr. Aziz talk a little bit more about the medical initiative.
Here's what I'd like to do, members of the committee. I'm going to do what he suggested. I want to pause here and allow any questions with respect to the cash side of the budget, the B budget, anything else that he's gone over, and the chancellor as well is here for questions. And then we can, because we're getting a lot of conversation with respect to the graduate medical education, and after that we'll let Dr. Aziz explain that if that suits the committee's will. If you'll also look in your package, I think you've got the special funding initiatives summary. You've got the Southern Region Education Board payments there, and it, as he said, that does retain the optometry and the minority doctor scholars program at their current level. You are phasing out the osteopathic, but we've understood that we now have that in Georgia, so that's really not an issue anymore. And you also have, the final thing is you have the Regent's capital outlay list of the request and the governor's recommendations, and behind that you have the individual summaries of the Regent's pipeline, or their list that's on their request. You'll see that the governor has effectively recommended most of the major capital projects there, and really not recommended any small capital projects. I think what you'll find is this is more of a return to the way we used to do this, and I think the governor, and I'm particularly appreciative, is recognizing that the legislature has a role in this. We are close to our communities. We do know what these individual university system units do have as an interest on these smaller projects, and the legislature historically has vetted those projects. So as you can see, I anticipate that we will make some recommendations from this committee on the small caps as well. So any questions on those that you have for the chancellor or anyone else? I'm not going to bring a parade of university presidents in here to actually go through these. I think they're fairly self-explanatory. They'll talk to you individually. They're busy people. I want them being presidents of their universities, not coming in here trying to tell us something that as a show. I think we all know how these work. They can stand on their own merits, and there's plenty of people who can advocate for them. So with that, any questions? I'll go start questions for for the Chancellor and for John Brown, and then we'll get to Dr. Aziz. Let's see. First is Chairman Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a couple of questions. One has to deal with this graduate medical education, the $1.2 million for residencies. How will that be distributed? Are there any criteria that's being developed? Because you currently, we have the Medical College of Georgia, Emory, Mercer, Morehouse. How will that be distributed as far as ensuring that other units other than the Medical College of Georgia get some of these residencies versus them all going to Medical College? Because you got, like Mercer, I know they have a higher retention rate than any of the other schools in the state.
If I can, let me give you about a 2-minute answer, and then I'll turn over to Dr. Aziz here.
And Chairman Smith, you will. Can we defer that to when? Let's let Dr. Aziz come up if it's all right with you, and then let's get all the other questions on this part done, and I'll certainly set aside all the time you need to delve deeper in that. Will that work for you?
Yes, sir. I have one other question that doesn't relate to
certainly.
The Extension Service has several openings around the state, and a lot of those positions have county money tied to them. How many of these positions are open, and what kind of county money are we looking at that's sitting there not being utilized?
67, $1,005,000.
That's the county money, $1,005,000?
That's the county money, and in order to fill them all with the estimated salary, the match that would go with it, $3.3 million state money.
Are they doing such things as keeping positions open so that they can fill other positions, like through salary savings?
That I don't know for sure. I would need to check. I suspect that over these last few years, yes, they have had to keep positions open. In fact, if you were to look at what is the most frequently used approach method for absorbing some of the reductions we've had, about half of them are rolled up into personnel actions, either holding vacancies or delaying something that was in the works, using part-time faculty on the teaching side of it.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, and Chairman Smith, we're going to get back to that. I'm not passing you over. I just want to make sure that we had more time to spend on that because I've gotten several questions there, so I want to get the other out of the way first. All right, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Budget Director Brown, I was going to refer to your page here on formula funding. The enrollment growth at 3%, is that $72 million plus for how many new students, or does that include the entire student body?
That's the entire growth amount at a 3% rate.
Mr. Chairman, if I could ask one more.
Certainly, go ahead, follow up.
Health insurance. I know y'all do your own health insurance, state separate from our state health benefit plan. Presently, you have, what, 90,000 employees enrolled. What do y'all pay? What compare it to ours? Is it equal to what we pay, or is it, do y'all band it in any way based on how much a professor makes or how much the chancellor makes? How do y'all do that?
It's not exactly equal. I need to get you information on what everyone pays. We're a little different. We go family plus one, spouse, we break down into some tiers that SHBP does not, based on size of family, as opposed to just broad family coverage.
But it's not based on payroll, correct?
No, it is not. It is, there's a set premium, and then, of course, there's the employer contribution.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, if I could ask follow up on the liability insurance, can you give us a breakdown on what your liability insurance is costing you, work comp is, and also your unemployment insurance?
I can give you the spread on that. I was going to say, I thought I might have included it.
I would assume more of that's workers' comp than it is.
That's correct. I can get you the spread by the three. I put a column on a page 2 to give you an idea of how all the money is spread across the programs, but I still left the 3 insurance programs.
Okay.
The truth is that our liability went down. Our workers' comp is a little up. Unemployment is the largest of the 3 that's up.
Further, question, Mr. Chairman.
Continue.
On the retirement health and life benefits, does the retiree pay anything after he retires?
Yes.
There is a 70-30 split on that as well? Okay. That concludes my questions.
Thank you, Chairman Rogers. Next is Yates.
Thank you, sir. I have 2 items. First is on page 7, the item 40.20, payments to Georgia Military College. They took a pretty good cut there. We've cut them a few times over the years. I just wondered what's the reason for that, you know?
That's really not one that's ours. That's really not one that's ours. That one's one that's attached for administrative purposes. And
Chairman Yates, I have a little bit of information on that. I can probably answer that for you. Those were the funds for the prep school and the junior college, and my understanding was that was the standard 2% cut that they took. And I did talk to General Boyle, and those are all right. He has some other interests, but that one I haven't heard a lot of feedback on in a negative way.
Thank you. The other item is on the capital outlay sheet. I see cut all the capital projects. Is that
no, if I could, let me take just a moment to explain page 5, which is the bonds, the capital outlay portion. Make sure you understand what you have there. You see the 2 columns, request versus governor's recommendation. The first category, we had requested 6 equipment projects. These are 6 projects that are about ready to come online. We usually break it into design, construction, equipment. Well, this is the slug of money for the equipment for buildings that'll soon open. We had requested 11.1 million. Governor has recommended 11.1 million. The second set of projects is capital outlay new construction. There were 6 projects we actually requested for 206 million. The governor recommended 4. The governor recommended 4, and then there were 2, the Valdosta project and the Georgia College project, that he did not recommend in his budget. I believe that certainly those projects have merit, and I believe he believes so as well, but he probably was trying to keep his bond package to $700 million as it is, and something just couldn't fit. We hope that you'll be able to give those consideration. I will say that 3 of those projects, Georgia Health Sciences Medical Commons has a $10 million match. Is it 10? 20? How much in match? $20 million match on that one, so 28 plus 20. The Georgia Tech project, I believe, is a $33 million match. And then the UGA Vet Med Teaching Hospital is a $15 million match. So part of the reason some of these went ahead of others was because of the significant match. We do have probably 2 years worth of projects that have been designed that are in the pipeline. Our strategy was to try to clear out the pipeline before we sought any new funding. If we're successful getting some of these, we'll probably be down to maybe a year's worth left in the pipeline, and then we can start looking ahead. The third category is a category the chancellor wanted to reinstitute. A few years ago, we used to have small cap projects that were under $5 million that gave some flexibility, because oftentimes you had some small projects trying to compete with these $30, $40 million projects. You see the list there. The State History Museum, which would be taking the old Coke building and turning it into a history museum. That has been transferred to us as a USG initiative. The $1.5 million would provide for some design and planning. Another project very worthwhile, Griffin Food Technology. This is food safety, food research, $3.5 million in bonds to do that. There's also $2 million in match on hand.
Yeah,
Can
I emphasize that the matches you mentioned is important. Because it's already a world famous facility down there. But I met with the Dr. Arkin down there, and he says, if we don't do something pretty soon, we're going to get 2 or 3 scientists about ready to retire. So it's pretty crucial.
Okay.
Thank you.
Chairman Yates, we're going to have some time in this committee to talk about the individual advocacy from, especially the members of this committee, for their individual projects. And like I said, these were the original recommendations. You know how the Board of Regents itself makes a recommendation on a list of projects, and that's what these requests are to the governor. He makes his recommendations, and my understanding is that we will have the opportunity to make recommendations as well, as it was always done in the past.
And on that particular project, we did include a handout in your file folder for that one. The Kennesaw project, it's an infrastructure expansion. There's a brochure in your folder on that one. And then 2 others. Last year, we started the practice of giving some funds for ag MRR. They have a lot of buildings, a lot of them run down. So $4 million to try to provide upkeep for those. And then we had started last year trying to phase in and replace 4-H cabins at Rock Eagle, $1 million for that hopefully you can consider. And then the last category is the other. Each year we request an amount for major repairs and renovations for the system as a whole. If you were to look at the backlog need, deferred maintenance, and so forth, the Chancellor and I have talked about this. We could probably use a year where we had $100 million or so, just 1 year to do that. We had requested 50. The number's 45. That 45 number is the amount that's currently budgeted for fiscal 12. I believe that's probably where it was derived. I would plead with you to, when you go to balance the bond package, maybe leave that one alone. It's very important money. Public library, $16 million of public library money was requested. I believe there's 15 or so projects that are on a list. The governor did not recommend any of those. The third item is the Georgia Research Alliance. For a number of years, Georgia Research Alliance, both cash and bonds, flowed through the university system. Last year, the Research Alliance was moved and attached to the Department of Economic Development. The cash remains attached with economic development, but the equipment that's used in research is really university system property. So the bonds are flowing back through the university system now. This $8 million gives them the normal slug that we look at each year in order to get the equipment that's needed. And then the last one, which is on the list, also has a brochure in your folder. This is the Fort McPherson. This is to retrofit a building down there, in the notion that I think the first proposal is to bring in a global health organization to do some vaccine research. The whole idea is that this is step one toward turning Fort Mac into our version of the Research Triangle, Silicon Valley, someplace where we can do research, and around it, it will sprout up other startup companies, spin-offs. So that's that $4 million. Grand total, we had requested $298 million. We received $232. Even that number is very fair. I've mentioned a $700 million bond package. We received approximately a third. We can't complain, but if you got capacity, we certainly have some ideas for you.
All right, thank you. We're going to continue with the questions. I just want to make sure I'm looking at our schedule. I understand the Vice Chancellor for Media and Publications is here. He's got about a 20-minute PowerPoint for us on media and publications to give. Chancellor Millsap, is that correct understanding? You have about 20 minutes of a presentation for us? Okay,
What we do have for you is Dr. Aziz, if we could get him to comment on some of the medical initiatives for a few minutes.
let me finish the questions here. I just understood that there might have been a presentation from Dr. Millsaps, but you and I can have a conversation offline. I've got a couple more questions for you from the members. That's Representative Rice, Chairman Rice.
Thank you, Chairman. John, it's always good to see you. Chancellor, good to see you too today. Just a real quick run. This is probably in the big budget document. I just don't have it with me. But the difference between the state funds and the total funds in terms of the sponsored tuition and any other miscellaneous funds, just kind of general number on that.
I'll give you the general breakdown. I may miss it a little bit, but the university system in total is about a $7 billion operation. 1.8 billion is state general funds. Being the former budget person, I certainly don't want this to be seen as whining, but that 1.8, there's buried in the formula about 1.1 billion of cuts. That 1.1 billion of state fund cuts has found its way kind of into tuition and fees, which makes up 1.8 to 2.0 billion. So you're up to just under 4, and then between departmental sales and services for a little bit of it and a whole lot of sponsored research money, that kind of makes up the difference.
Okay. Question on the teaching budget, how is that allocated down to the schools? I mean, we give you this big number based upon formula growth, but my understanding is that there's a significant differential, obviously based on salary levels and what they teach and things like this.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a long question.
I'll give you the short answer. The formula is not used straight up. What one puts into the formula in terms of enrollment and credit hours, we do not take and crank it out by system and give them their exact earnings, or at least that's been the practice. I think that we're going to be doing some things differently in allocations. I think I will make that run to at least see what everyone's earnings are. But then in some cases, we'll want some latitude for those that are doing certain things that should be rewarded or should be encouraged. And there'll be some differences, but we can't have wide swings and differences. And what was started last year, one of the pledges that we've made is, in as much as we can, we're going to try to look at the differences within sectors and over some period of time start trying to close the gap. So we'll do that. A lot of the money in the past was doled out straight on how much did one contribute to enrollment or how much did one contribute to square footage. Gosh, I hope I can think more than that. I'd like to work with the chancellor and we identify some initiatives. And as we go forward on performance funding, which you're on that commission, whatever develops there, whatever our metrics are, I hope that that's going to play into our allocation decisions as well.
Any follow-up on that? Okay. The next is Chairman Knight.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I apologize, I walked in late, so you may have covered this. I don't see it in the tracking document. Last year, we were concerned there were some issues going on with the weather stations that was up under the university system last year. Is there been any changes there? And could you maybe elaborate on, I know they're in dire straits as to funding there. They're trying to look for partners out within the ag community to come in and help there, but I know we did have a piece of, our piece of that was still paid for by state funds. Are you familiar with
this? Was
the ag station, the weather stations that are all over the state, the University of Georgia?
I'll just tell you that we haven't addressed anything so far in our first 7 months, but now that I know, we'll get to the bottom and take a look at it for you.
Those are I think, very important across the state, so I think it's something we want to look at. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Smart, former Chairman of Rules.
How you doing, Brown? I'm looking at the capital outlay, the small and minor capital projects, And I remember when we started those minor projects years ago, and then it was stopped. I'm just glad to see y'all at least going back to listing some of those, because I think the rationale was at that time it was very difficult for a small minor project to compete with a major construction site, something that's expansion or dealing with outlay that's dealing construction of a major building versus the improvement or the expansion or the repair of something that was critical to the operation of a university or school. Would you elaborate?
I appreciate your positive comments on that. The small cap project list was started in the Miller administration. I happened to be the budget director then, and I thought it served a great purpose. We have asked the governor to consider reinstating it. To his credit, we went to him and made a presentation. We had to ask him specifically because it was outside the guidelines. And he did, even though he didn't recommend funded, he did approve our at least asking for that and putting it in our request. So I think that shows a positive step. But we think, and I've had experience at the institutional level, for example, at the University of Georgia, if you got a $5 million project and you're only likely to get one project in the budget, a common sense tells you the university is going to go for that $30 million project rather than that $5 million project. So we think this is something we ought to look toward the future, and we'll keep having conversations with the governor and his staff and with you as well as we go forward.
Mr. Chairman, I know you remember when we